Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another thing where I talk about things. This will be the last vlog on this channel. If you want to continue to follow us on the vlogs and the personal times and stuff like that, well, it might not be the last video, it'll be the last personal time anyway. We'll still do updates and things like that on occasion, but this will be the last regular personal time. If you want to follow us, we have a vlog channel now where we're going to do the personal time with Greg videos. I have a link in the description, so if you want to go subscribe to that, that would be fine. If you want to be consistently reminded about stuff and not rely on the YouTube system, we have the newsletter. Sign up for the newsletter, and we will send out an email once a month, and we'll let you know what we have posted everywhere that we have posted it, so that you don't miss out on anything, regardless of whether or not YouTube's doing any kind of shenanigans. So, yes, today though, since this is the last video, I suppose I figure I'll close it out with an interesting story to open with. And this one is kind of interesting. A couple of days ago, I got up in the morning, and as I was walking by Alan's room, drowsily as I was, his door was cracked open slightly, and something caught the periphery of my vision, and I was passing, and I just stopped. Like, I froze. I could have sworn that what I saw was some kind of, like, weird little green alien thing, or something like that, as I was passing by his room, and I thought to myself, no, that can't be right. That can't be what that is. Like, it was probably a stuffed animal or something like that. Like, it looked about like, oh, I don't know, yay tall, and just, you know. So I backed up to do a double take, and I look at Alan's room, and standing right in front of his door, sure enough, is a 4-foot tall plastic Ninja Turtle. And I really did see a 4-foot tall green man in Alan's room after all. It startled the heck out of me. I haven't like asked him why he has it yet or anything like that. I kind of enjoy the mystery so far. Like, I don't really want to be filled in, but I don't know. Like, it's just one of those things. Like there's a lot of pizza boxes and stuff like that in Alan's room. So there's like a giant plastic Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle in a like surrounded by pizza boxes and you know, I don't know. Interesting times. So yes. Today I think I'm going to talk about the Skellingrim campaign. We're going to go back to that. We had, you know, of course, a break as we got into stuff going on with YouTube. But where we left off, I believe, is that the group had just left the desert, or rather the Thraken tribe, after having the anklet of Lord Archaeopteryx revitalized into a glowing beacon of magic, which was like a signal flare to any undead for miles. So the group got back on their way, heading along to the capital city of the dragons to catch up with Skellingrim, who'd gone ahead of them, because you know, they told them that they said that they would be there. They just had to do some stuff or something like that. So when they got into town, I believe that they told Skellingrim ahead of time that they were hurting for money a little bit, and I think that Lyman had mentioned that he was interested in learning about magics or something like that. And so when they got to the inn, they found that Skellingrim had been waiting for them, and he was a little concerned about what they had to do, but they tried to play it off. And so Skellingrim gave Lyman like a book, and it was like an incredibly rare magical book. It was like a really ancient tome. It was written by one of the premier practicers in the dark arts. It was written by somebody named Burgundy, and it didn't ring a bell to the group at first who it was. This was like a very famous name, but they couldn't quite place off the top of their heads who this was. And I can't remember, it was only Lyman who took the role, I think, because no one else actually got to see the book, but it was just like, oh, written by Burgundy, famous wizard, I guess. Okay, yeah, that sounds really familiar. I could have sworn I heard about that. And so Mr. Skellingrim, you know, he's like, yeah, so I also have some gold and stuff for you guys, traveling money, and we're almost there. Here's the plan. I've got this scythe, this like jeweled, you know, ornate scythe with all these magical enchantments and things like that. It's a thing that I got from the war, and you know, it's one of the spoils of the war. It's like a very rare and valuable thing among the undead, and I'm going to give this to the Lord of the Dragons, and in exchange I'm going to ask if he can make one of the dragons beneath him provide us a ride the rest of the way to our destination, because it would save us so much time. This coming from the idea of like, well, how come Gandalf didn't use the eagles as a taxi service? Like, getting the ring into the volcano was one of the most important things they ever could have done. They really should have called the eagles for that. So we just had like, well, the dragons, they can fly. Like they don't have friends like the eagles, but we can make a deal with the dragons, so the dragons will just fly us the rest of the other half of the trip, the last leg of the journey, and we'll be there. Time saved. So, the group at this point, though, they had their suspicions about Skellingrim because they'd been introduced to a lot of things that contradicted the stuff that Skellingrim had said. And, I can't remember, I can't remember if Lyman had gotten that book beforehand. I think he had just gotten it. But, yes, the group kind of spent some time fussing and kind of trying to figure out whether or not they wanted to go along with what Burgundy was doing. I think they told him, like, oh, well, we need to recuperate and do some stuff, like, we're not quite ready yet. And then they decided that I think they were gonna, they tried to break into Skellingrim's inn room to go rifle through his stuff to see if they could find anything that indicated his real identity or what his motivations were or anything like that. And the thing that Skellingrim was doing is he was just renting this room and then using it to teleport away to go do whatever, like, wizard things that he had to go do. Like, he had other business to go. So, like, I think they tried to pick the lock initially, but then botched the roll on picking the lock. And so then they went around and they tried to, like, stack up a bunch of boxes. It was on the second floor. So they tried to stack up a bunch of boxes. Second story. They tried to stack up a bunch of boxes and then climb their way up to the window. And then I think they like opened up the window and or they found the window was locked or closed or something like that. But they looked in and there was like nothing in there. Mr. Skellingrim didn't really have any belongings that he had to carry with him. He didn't have like a diary. It wasn't like Skyrim. He didn't have like a diary that said like, I am so and so and this is my nefarious plan. Now Skyrim loves to do that, like, for everything. Everybody keeps a journal of all their nefarious deeds, even like illiterate bandits and things like that. They leave behind notes just in case anyone finds like, and if you so have found this body, I killed this man because he stole my left slipper. And Skyrim. So Skellingrim, no, he didn't really have like any indication that he was anything other than Skellingrim. But, after fooling around with that for a while, the party eventually came downstairs and they came clean with Skellingrim and they were like, all right, look, it's come to our attention that maybe not everything is as it seems. Oh, right, and I skipped a beat, too. Before they even got to the capital, they had to travel through the desert again. And they got attacked by a bunch of blackish creatures with, like, a weird kind of sheen to them. Like a weird kind of oily look to them. They told Skellingrim about this when they came clean with him. But these creatures, though, what they actually were is that after they revitalized the amulet, there was a substance below the ground, essentially. It was a sort of primordial stuff that the universe was made from. And back during creation, when Woodfuss screwed up and didn't play his parts right, some of that crud didn't, like, form into anything proper and just got kind of, it sank below the earth and just kind of stayed there. So this kind of primordial stuff could become sort of anything. It could be a source of energy, it was a source of raw magic, but it could also sort of take life, but in kind of a more of an imitation of life is what it did. So when the stuff got affected by the anklet, it gained a certain amount of sentience and then rose up out of the well and then climbed up into the desert. And as it was traveling through the desert after the anklet, because it wanted to be in contact with the anklet again, it was a thing that was actually meant to store and maintain the power of this primordial stuff. This was kind of the hook of the whole thing. It turns out that Lord Archaeopteryx, I don't remember if I talked about this early on, Lord Archaeopteryx was actually a creature created from this primordial stuff when Woodfuss screwed everything up. He was way back from the very, very dawn of time. He was formed before all the stuff actually sank down into the earth. He just kind of came to be, and he looked like a mishmash of like birds and dinosaurs and other weird things, Lord Archaeopteryx. And so... yeah, Lord Archaeopteryx, he was kind of one of these creatures, but he'd been around so long that he'd become kind of who he was. He was no longer this weird primordial soup. He had become like a physical creature. He'd sort of adapted and developed an existence of his own, but there was only one, Lord Archaeopteryx, because, nothing else actually came to exist, or very few things came to exist and then survived in that form. There were actually other creatures that rose up out of the depths like that, and they became great, terrible, unspeakable monsters from the ages of legends, things like that, myth and stuff like that. But Archaeopteryx was the only one that developed sentience, and intelligence rather. He was the only one who became intelligent and was able to communicate. He remained kind of adaptable through many, many years, and eventually was able to interact with all the races that, like he first started interacting with elves and with dwarves. And this wasn't entirely secret, because there was actually a book of Archaeopteryx, which I'd written out, and I believe that I'd given to people who had a relevant background, like someone was playing a half-orc or something like that, and I'd indicated to them, like I'd sent them a link to the Google Doc, but they, like later on, they were like, wait a minute, there's a religious text? And I was like, yeah, I wrote out a religious text describing the origins of Lord Archaeopteryx. It's all written down by the orcs who worship him. And then he was like, oh, I didn't know about this. And it was like, well, whatever. So most of the party members didn't realize that there was all this backstory that was available had they looked into the religion that surrounded Lord Archaeopteryx, because the undead all worshipped him as a sort of living deity, and so did the orcs, and if you were a half-orc, you might, if you still, had any of the heritage or anything like that. But yeah, Lord Archaeopteryx, he was part of this sort of primordial soup, and so these creatures then, like, these things, this soup was traveling through the desert, it ran into, like scorpions, snakes, wasps, things like that, and they became kind of like bizarre imitations of these creatures. So by the time the party by the time it caught up with the party, it had split into multiple creatures as opposed to just a single rolling kind of ooze, and it had become these things, like larger versions of these things, kind of weird, disgusting, like they were behaving sort of similar to the creatures, but they'd only really been seen at a cursory glance, so they weren't really, it was like, first time I've ever seen a scorpion, and so I'm doing what I think a scorpion will do. Which caused them to be really weird and really jerky, and when they died, it was spasmodic and terrible. And then they collapsed into ooze again, which the party gathered up. Like, they just gathered up as much of the sand as they could, and they put it in a barrel, because they had party members who were strong enough to just carry that stuff around. And we're like, well, we know that this weird ooze stuff has something to do with forging weapons back in the Thraken tribe, so they just hung on to the ooze. So they explained all this to Skellingrim, who, after everyone, they kind of came clean about everything that they'd been doing and all their suspicions, and Skellingrim said, well, we're out of, like, the dragons are neutral territory, so I may as well come clean with you guys. And he takes off his hood, and he's a Skellington! He's a Skellington! Mr. Skellingrim was a skeleton the entire time. It wasn't really meant to be that big of a reveal. It was one of those, like, everyone pretend you don't know things. But yeah, Mr. Skellingrim was a skeleton. But the actual thing that was shocking to the party, I believe, was yeah, they did find out about this, was that he was the wizard Burgundy, which was to say that he was essentially the right-hand man to Lord Archaeopteryx, one of the oldest people to ever befriend Lord Archaeopteryx and then be resurrected as an undead. Burgundy was a very powerful sorcerer. He'd been around for a long time. The way that the story actually goes, the origin story goes, was that Lord Archaeopteryx was very powerful in all kinds of different magics. And one thing that a lot of tribes in the region had a custom of doing was when somebody died, it was common to temporarily resurrect them as an undead with willpower, which was a very difficult and powerful ritual to do at the time. But you had a very high-ranking shaman who would sit down and spend like a great deal of time preparing these rites and doing this ritual. And so you would revive the dead, and with the power that you had, which was not substantial, you gave them a couple of hours maybe to confirm their will. If they hadn't made a will, to make one, say their final goodbyes to their family. So it was a thing that was really like you look at D&D and they've got all this necromancy and raising the dead and I just bring this person back to life, this sort of thing. And so I thought that, this would be a thing that would happen. Family members die and, maybe you can't bring them back to life, but you can certainly bring them back to talk to them for a little while. I believe that there is actually a spell that just allows you to talk to the dead if you have a piece of their body. So yeah, they would just come back and they would just be like, oh yes, no, I confirm, no one tampered with my will, this is what I wanted, me being of sound mind and dead body, do hereby bequeath all my belongings to my son, or whatever. And so, and they could go around, they could say, I just wanted to say, Jerry, I always hated you, that kind of thing. They got their final rest, they got to sit through their, and you'd do a funeral, and they would actually sit through the funeral. And then at the end of the funeral, they'd say goodbye, and they'd lower them into the ground, and that was the end. You're buried and you're gone. So yes. So Lord Archaeopteryx, though, he was actually incredibly powerful and had so much magical potential that he took an interest in this sort of thing. And he was very good at raising the dead, and he could do it kind of effortlessly. And so he just did that. And he wanted to hang around all the human tribes and sort of like, because he found that, I'm interacting and I'm useful and this is good. But because he was this weird kind of primordial creature, he gave off this really just unpleasant aura that everyone sort of hated. Nobody really liked being around Lord Archaeopteryx. They only kind of wanted him to be, or he wasn't Lord Archaeopteryx at the time, he was just Archaeopteryx. They really only wanted him to be, there for the rituals, and at that point as far away as he could be. They were kind of happier if he just stayed in a little temple. And what you should be imagining is kind of a slightly more Aztec kind of thing. They had like ziggurats and things like that they built, and so they just kind of wanted him to stay in his little temple ziggurat far away from everybody else. And they would just, they would bring the body to him and just be like, so and so has died, can you revive him? And then he could keep them alive pretty much indefinitely. So they would have the dead walk back, and that was just sort of an alteration to the ritual. So he was useful, but frequently shunned and not well liked. But a weird thing, though, whenever he brought someone back from the dead, they had a very strong affinity to him, as opposed to being repulsed by him. Being around Lord Archaeopteryx had kind of a calming effect. It was a little bit euphoric. It was kind of nice. The undead sort of liked being around him. And so, they might come back and say, like, okay, I'm ready to be entombed or whatever, and they would, they'd bury him in Lord Archaeopteryx's ziggurat, as had become the custom. This is where we take the dead now. And instead of, letting them die right away, they might hang around and talk for a while and be friends. And so Lord Archaeopteryx got this sort of social interaction, and he really got to like the dead. Like, he got to like the dead a lot. Like, it was really nice when humans died, because they were so nice to him when they came back from the dead. And so he kind of made a lot of undead friends, but he always had to, put them back in the dirt and let them stay dead. And so they couldn't stay as friends for very long, they only for like the evening after they died. And there was only one person who was really kind of tolerant of everything, and Burgundy was like the high priest, the high shaman who originally did the rituals, and who kind of transferred a lot of that over to Lord Archaeopteryx when they found that he was willing and happy to do this. So for many years, Burgundy was interacting with Lord Archaeopteryx, and he was quite polite and kind of got used to the feeling of repulsion and fought it down and found that he could get along with Lord Archaeopteryx quite well, and whatever feelings he had, he recognized them as being induced magically or something like that, and just kind of ignored it. So Lord Archaeopteryx particularly liked Burgundy as he was alive, which was very rare for a mortal at all. And so finally, one day, Burgundy got very old, and he just died. He died as people do. So Lord Archaeopteryx brought him back, and then decided that he didn't want Burgundy to go away. Burgundy was his only living friend, and he wasn't ready to like not have he just wasn't ready to let it go. So he decided that you know what, no, I'm actually not going to put you back to death. And he says, and I've talked to a lot of other undead, and they're, a lot of them say that they wouldn't mind hanging around. Like, previously they couldn't because there wasn't enough magical power, but I could just keep them going indefinitely. So, Burgundy, he had never really been exposed to the soothing aura of being undead and in Lord Archaeopteryx's presence. And so all these things sounded very compelling and like a very good idea. And even undead, Burgundy still retained his full magical potential. And so he eventually agreed that, this actually does sound quite sensible. Maybe we shouldn't be interring the dead after all. We'll just make our own separate little city of the dead where people go, and when you die, you go and you join your family, and this will be fine. Like, we'll have kind of this and we'll have that. And the trouble was that the dead over time, over the years, eventually grew to sort of outnumber the living, and Lord Archaeopteryx really had no qualms with sort of moving into other people's space. If people died as a result of disease or things like that, well, that was just more friends. That was just more people that looked up to Lord Archaeopteryx, and he liked being a leader of sorts. He was in charge of the undead, and so things eventually got out of control. And so this undead like little ziggurat eventually grew into a town, and then into a city, and then into sort of a sprawling nation, and it began to encroach out into the world and hitting actually like established borders in more advanced nations. Like they got out through the jungles and the mountainous regions and all the hostile terrain where they were located, and eventually they came out into sort of the fertile valleys and plains and stuff like that of civilizations that had been around a while and had established themselves and had built their own governments, their own civic structures, roads, these sorts of things. And as the undead started to sort of encroach out into that as an organized force, it became a bit of a problem, and this was how the war started. And so they started to push back, and it's, Lord Archaeopteryx insisted it was a defensive war, but of course the mortals insist that they were defending themselves from the undead because their borders began to sort of conflict, and of course the undead just kept growing. So that was how the whole thing started, and so Burgundy had been around since the very, very beginning, and the thing that he'd gotten to was he was very unhappy with the leadership of Lord Archaeopteryx. After they lost the war, things kind of crumpled. There was a bit of hiccup in space-time, and this was essentially when Widfa, off in the realm of creation or whatever, got taken off of the instrument that he was on and put on the triangle. It's suddenly like Lord Archaeopteryx lost all of his power. He was no longer receiving this consistent source of like chaos and weirdness and dissonance from one of the beings in creation. Now he was just getting the little triangle ding every now and then, and so he just had this little bit of like, he lost a lot of his power, and so he was using most of it just to keep the undead stable, and he took what he had, and he was able to like take the excess of his power, and he was putting it into this anklet. And so the anklet was allowing him to remain powerful and remain active so long as he took rests, and then he refilled the anklet and everything like that. And to forge this thing, to create this anklet, it required the use of the power that he had as it was waning, and he wasn't really able to get up to like that maximum energy potential that he could create a second one. Once he lost the first one, he was screwed. He didn't have the power to make a second one. So that was it. He was just kind of sitting around with his thumbs up his ass, doing his best to just maintain the nation that was there. The undead ranks couldn't really grow. They couldn't really expand. They couldn't really do anything. They'd begun to stagnate. There was a lot of bitterness, and Lord Archaeopteryx was spending a lot of time kind of feeling sorry for himself because, he wasn't used to just being powerless. He'd been this sort of like godlike entity for so long, and now he just didn't know what to do. So Burgundy was upset, and just as he'd managed to suppress his repulsion when he was alive of Lord Archaeopteryx, he managed to repress the sort of euphoria that he got from being around him, and decided that it was about time to actually put Lord Archaeopteryx to rest and be done with him for good. So he explained this to the party, and he says, basically, I want to see Lord Archaeopteryx dethroned. I don't want him to come back to power. Like he's been mismanaging everything. Like our relations with the living didn't have to be so hostile. Like I think politically speaking, there are a lot of different options. And he put forward a very compelling explanation for what he wanted, one that would resonate with mortals who also saw Lord Archaeopteryx as a bad guy. Is essentially he got up there and he goes, yeah, no, like I don't like him because he's a bad guy. And all the mortal player characters were like, oh yeah, no, he is the bad guy. And then so Burgundy was like, yes, he's the bad guy. So I don't want him to get his anklet back. So we're taking the anklet to this god of merchandising, this god of selling stuff, this god of mercantile, and that's what's going on. And so the party was like, oh, okay, all right. So they kind of came around, and they agreed that they were a little bit wary of it. Like they had a discussion about the whole thing, and they were like, so do we really? It seems like Burgundy's aims are essentially our aims, and we're kind of all moving towards a goal that everybody would want. So, is this cool? And the party eventually all agreed that they'd continue to see their way through, and if at some point it looked like they were getting set up for a double cross, they'd bail on it, and they'd try to keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, it sounded like they were getting what most of the world wanted out of the deal, and they agreed to keep helping Burgundy. So yes, that was all that lore and everything like that. Like I say, it was something I don't know if the players ever actually knew about all the history about how Lord Archaeopteryx came to be. But like I say, there was essentially a Bible that was written by Lord Archaeopteryx, who'd been there since the very beginning, that said essentially, this is how things happened from my point of view. And I think that it did come up once or twice, and they were like, how factual is that Bible regarded? And I was like, well, mortals generally reject most of the writings in that particular Bible because it was written by Lord Archaeopteryx, the king of the undead. So, you know, clearly everything that he said is blasphemy and evil, and nobody really trusts it. And so I think the party was just like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever. Except for the half-orc player, who's just like, oh, man, like, shoot, I need a copy of that. And I was like, well, like, you're not anywhere that sells copies of that right now. Like, if you didn't have it before when I explained it, then it's not there now. So, yes, that was all there. That was all the reason for everything that had happened in the world, or that was sort of the background for that. But anyway, yeah. After that, they moved on to the next particular plot point. So I suppose that here will be a good place to wrap up for now. So thanks for joining me, everybody. I will catch you all next time.